Hello and welcome to Hello Yellow. This is a program that is all about finding opportunity through adversity. And today I'm joined by Peter Cullen, who is the founder of a charity that exists in Australia like no other. It's called Reclink. Let me give you a bit of a sense of what it's about. Before Reclink, I was busted, worn out, tired, sad, lonely. I was beaten, broken. I don't think I cared before Reclink. It's a lost person who doesn't want to be found again. It's a busted person who says, "Leave me alone, I want to be busted." There's hurt before Reclink, but there's joy at Reclink. There's spirit, there's life, there's happiness, and it is Reclink that brings me my strength. That's from a former participant of Reclink called Brian Presnell, who joined you when he was just 14 years of age and sadly has passed away. Welcome to the program, and tell us a little bit about what this amazing book does, but more so what the charity does.
Yeah, thanks, Vivienne. We bring sport and recreation through the social services of Australia, meaning homeless, people with drug and alcohol, mental health challenges, refugees, people involved in the justice system, disability. So it's a very broad range of disadvantage. We do a very broad range of sports and recreation. There's 75 different sports and put on over 10,000 events a year across Australia. But the power of inclusion has huge effects on physical and mental health. It's really about including the unincluded across Australia, and we're very keen to broaden our reach, and it's what we put together was born initially really from the streets of St Kilda. From what I've seen and observed, Vivienne, I was doing street outreach at the time for about 9 months. I was working at the Sacred Heart Mission in Grey Street West, St Kilda. And what I've seen is that people came there after trauma and they found more trauma, and they go from crisis to crisis. And to give you one defining story, on asking one person, or saying to one person, I'm sorry, that I'd had one of those days, they said, "Peter, I've had one of those lives." Yeah. But I could see etched in their whole persona that they had had one of those lives. I was very young in the field. We're talking 33, 34 years ago. Reclink was born in 1990, but I was doing street outreach in 89. I went on to see that there was many people who'd had one of those lives. They went from crisis to crisis, but they weren't accessing anything, or certainly not accessing anything positive, and could move in a destructive cycle very quickly. I felt like there was something missing in welfare, provision. There's a lot in welfare that stops people from drowning, but not a lot that helps people to swim. Another homeless man who really created another defining moment, this is sort of leading into the birth of Reclink, is a homeless person with schizophrenia. I'm trying to be, obviously help people. I've just left training for priesthood. I'm really looking for my mission in life, and I identify it really, which became my whole life. But pretty much what he said is, I asked him what his goals were for the future. He just looked at me and said, "Peter, I don't even know what to do in the present."
And how old was this person?
He would have been about 40, I would say, roughly.
And what do you say to people, because we're talking about St Kilda in Melbourne, obviously, and sometimes, you do judge people, and obviously you will have had a lot of experience with that sense of judgment, and people who seem helpless. What do you say to those people who judge them and say, well, just go and get a job?
Well, at one stage I did a book called Voices of the Street, and I was fortunate enough to see the stories behind people's faces. I probably did 100 interviews. In each of those interviews, what I saw was stories that I would never have known or could not possibly have known. But I found myself saying, did this really happen to you? Was this really your story? And people can be born into a war zone, you know, people are born into all sorts of circumstances, you know, they could be born into both parents being addicts, you know, you could just go on and on and on. And in St Kilda, I suppose, suicides and overdoses were a constant daily conversation in this setting leading towards the birth of Reclink. Suicidal feelings. If you spoke to people at any depth, that would surface very often, I found, constantly. It was one of the things I heard over and over and over. When we did eventually, we provided no-cost accessible sport by bringing welfare agencies together to work together. We found it was a real silo breaker, and opportunities began to be born. And when we found these opportunities were born, we found that they were very life-giving and in many cases life-saving. And it was, you know, it became very common for people to say, this has really saved my life. But sport and recreation can provide an immediate emotional reward. Kick, mark, handball, pass.
Raise the endorphins level, raise the endorphin levels.
The endorphin thing is usually powerful. And to give you an illustration of the point you raised there, from a person from the street suffering from addiction, we have a 16-team footy league. We started off with 4 teams. Initially started off with kick to kick, and even full-blown people with drug addiction, and all forms of people would come to our great cultural game that people loved. It had great drawing power. Getting back to your point, about the endorphins. To illustrate your point, the man says to me, I said, what do you get out of playing Australian rules football? And this man had suffered drug addiction. He'd been in hospitals and all sorts of things. He became a captain and he was eventually employed. He said, Peter, it's a clean rush, but it's real. And he said, another man who just got a basketball through a hoop, I was talking to him, he said, those few moments of adulation are just, you know, priceless, really.
It's a winning feeling, isn't it? You know, where you're actually putting your body through the paces, and even just shooting a ball through a hoop and having success with that actually just makes you feel good about yourself and gives you a little bit of temporary purpose, I would imagine too.
Yeah, that's also an interesting thing, because it brings people into structure that wasn't there, or at least positive structure, into opportunity. But even the fact of actually doing something, I mean, another thing that I used to hear, if people weren't doing something or weren't connecting to something, they would say, I often feel useless. That was another common thread. So my point is that there's so many threads in this street outreach over the 9 months that point to the birth of Reclink, and I can sort of almost go on rattling them off. But one man, for example, left prison, so he's out on the street. I get to talk to him, and you can tell that he's lost or anxious.
Well, it is hard for ex-criminals to re-engage in the community because they have a record, they have a past, and then it's even further isolating. And it is common practice, isn't it, that people do re-offend because they actually have a sense of belonging to a tribe that actually exists in prison. Is that correct?
Yeah. I thank you for that point. This is the message for Australia. Where does someone go when they've left a prison if they've got nowhere to go? We're saying we welcome you at Reclink. When somebody leaves a drug and alcohol facility, even after doing 12 months of working on recovery, the same man who told me about the clean rush that's real also said to me this. He said, Peter, do you know why people go back to using drugs and alcohol? In a moment of loneliness, in a moment of vulnerability, we go back to the old friends. With this football team, the Salvo Hawks, which is a specialist team, doing AA and NA meetings before training, before matches. They often meet up socially. They have people they can, mature people in recovery they can phone. Yet they're meeting for this life-giving, adrenaline, exciting sport. And to me, playing Australian rules is the most life-giving thing that I've ever experienced personally. And that was part of the reason why I thought, wow, imagine bringing that game to people off the street. And the first team here was all recruited off the street, literally, all from the meal service down there. And other teams have been too. There was another chap in Frankston who did, and can be hugely powerful. And there's so many little stories of players where they, one player seen a sign advertised in a church advertising for this new Reclink Frankston Dolphins footy team.
Great.
And what he said he noticed though was he said he didn't notice the football, but what he noticed was that there was going to be a barbecue on down there.
so it was
yummy
really
food. The food. And he couldn't believe this coach actually got him to run a lap. Oh. And he'd had a huge background in crime from not in a serious kind of way, if I can get away with saying that. I mean, he stole a lot of cars, ended up on the front page of the Herald Sun. But at 12 years ago, age similar to Brian, he's sleeping on a train. He's happy to be invisible. He says the same thing actually in his story. I was happy to be invisible. People were going to work in their suits. I didn't really want to talk to anyone. His prisons never probably had a regular employment outside of this structure of crime. His life was really, really that. But he completely broke that cycle through the support of a coach, through eventually being taken, there'd be a lot more to his story than this, but being taken to an employment agency. He now works full time. He's completely broken that cycle, but he used to help the coach who formed a complete sport and recreational program that was held every day, and he got involved. He began helping him, and he began to see and feel and experience life in a way that he hadn't. That moved him to a whole new life.
So just through a totally different lens, and also just someone taking, I guess, note and care and consideration and taking an interest in them and finding a value in, their human spirit, which I would say would be quite, flat, to say the very least. Yeah,
well, that coach's name was Alan Quaife, and he was really quite remarkable, to be honest with you. And to give you an example, he actually was it's in the book. It's one of the stories, a very powerful story.
Yeah, I want to talk about the book in a moment. Yep.
In terms of the human spirit, I probably haven't. This bloke must have did the best retirement that I could ever. He was totally dedicated. He became a Christian, or he had some spiritual awakening, as he put it. But what happened? He was actually assaulted by a group of youth, to the point where he had very severe disability.
And how old was he, and when did that happen?
He would have been in his 60s, and he walked with a very severe limp.
So he was assaulted in his 60s?
He was assaulted. But in terms of adversity and the theme of your program and the power of resilience, he decided he was going to contribute to his community. He played for South Melbourne, Fitzroy, and some seconds games with Collingwood. He was a beautiful man, and all those players speak so highly of him, very generous. But he also recruited, even though he limped along very severely too, very, very severely, recruited all his players literally off the street with a bit of support from other people and flyers all around Frankston. And this team, they did really well. But he had a really good background in sport, and he'd been kind of like a phys ed teacher. But how he overcome diversity to have this, to see life, and I guess that gets back to your earlier point, because it is what people say in the general community, but it's not always as simple as that. But when this man had the patience, he provided the structure as Reclink does, the opportunity, and the power to reach out. And just on the whole Reclink thing, Reclink goes to places that sporting clubs wouldn't normally go to.
How so?
Yeah. Homeless organisations on the street, boarding houses. We're seeking players or that percentage of the population with whom sport may deliver its biggest gift or its biggest impact. And we're wanting Australians to really get behind this. We're really wanting to go to so many more communities than that we are in.
How many communities are you in at the moment?
Across the federal, we're in 25 communities, but I think it's in 110, 120 local government areas.
So tell me, for those people that don't really understand what Reclink is, it is a sporting and connections, environment for those people who are disadvantaged, and they come from all walks of life, from all over Australia, or is it just Melbourne centric?
We work through the social services or welfare agencies, 500 member agencies. Sounds like an enormous success story, and when I mention that to people, they say, "Oh wow, that's quite amazing." But Australia deserves more, our people deserve more, and those who are most isolated deserve more. And I think Reclink, after 34 years of working on this cause, this mission, which no one else is doing, and it's an opportunity for Australia to save money.
How so? Explain that to people who are listening or watching.
Well, just to get an equation like, what does it cost for prisons, police? People scream for police, more and more police all the time. I get it. I mean, I understand that screaming. But I also say, gee, if you look at the opposite side of the ledger, courts, can you imagine what that, we'll put up another prison. Can you imagine what that costs our community? And yet we've been able to do this. Federally, we get 1.6 million. Within that 1.6 million, we have 10,000 of our 160,000 participants have a disability. There's around 10,000 in youth. Now, if I could put that in NDIS terms, can you imagine what that would be? I mean, one package can be 100, 130,000 without knowing a lot about it. So I don't want to mouth off too much.
Sure.
But in saying that, I know enough about it that's that kind of money. The great thing is that they do come to our opportunities. They do come to our structures. Reclink also stood up very powerfully in research. The Centre for Sport and Social Impact did a study on our football league, and they said that we got the highest return for investment for government dollar that they had ever witnessed, which was $8.99 at that time for a 12-team footy league. And they said it's not because you work with disadvantage, but your model is cooperative and it's resource-based. It builds resources. So it not only involves the Reclink staff, but the Reclink staff go out into the community and involve the police and the churches and the Rotary clubs and the volunteers, and they're all brought into this sporting arena, and people who can provide opportunities. And anybody can be a part of facilitating an opportunity through the vehicle of Reclink to reach the most disadvantaged Australians. So really, I see it as a gold for Australia, a golden opportunity for governments coming up to elections to get behind something like this. It'll be an alternative in many areas, local, state and federally.
Well, COVID has done us no favours with the mental health system, and, the use of digital technology has also compromised the mental health amongst our youth. So, there is a real need to take the pressure off our medical systems, our ambulances, all of our community support systems that are actually supported by the government. And what would you say to that sort of comment that, that there is so much pressure?
It's not only, we're now doing sports equipment for disadvantaged communities. That's where this has really come home to me.
Amazing.
So we do, and just on that point, we do sport and recreation programs. To your point about COVID, just to go back there, 34 years ago, we wanted to bring people from deep isolation into community. Now the whole country is talking about the fallout of isolation. And we want to respond to that. We're not the only one who can respond to that, but we've got a key role because of our ability and our shown ability to reach the most vulnerable. In terms of sports equipment, families are now finding it more challenging financially, which we're hearing about every day. Sports equipment gets wasted like food. Sometimes people buy sports equipment and may not even get it out of the pack. It's actually sitting in a pack in somebody's garage.
You know, a boxing bag that doesn't get used, and treadmills and
bikes.
Yes,
and
all of those.
We have a factory down. We call this Reclink Sports Shed. We've now just been supported enough to rent a factory. We've got some existing buildings which beside that, where we do bikes and that for refugees, which provides transport, provides health, provides recreation, and various other forms of disadvantaged. To try and give you a couple of little stories to bring home your question, hopefully. My wife got a couple of brand new balls out of the factory for a family she'd heard had been going through some difficult times.
Balls like these?
Yeah, balls like this life-giving, exciting, Sharon.
Leather-bound
there
beauty.
There it is with the Reclink. But anyway, I won't get distracted. She takes the ball, it's a Saturday night, they're out in the garden, she goes across. This is what she says to me when she gets home. Just these few simple words. The children were beside it, the multicoloured brand new balls, basketballs. The children are beside the mother. She gives the basketballs to the mother, and the child pops up and says, "This is the greatest day of my life." Oh. This is the greatest day of my life. Another situation like that, this particular mother phones up. I've got 12-year-old children, do your sport. At that time, we didn't do sports for that age group, although we're starting to get into the school age groups and doing some involvement with schools. So I said, we can't do the sports programs, but what we can do, I've got sports equipment, would that be helpful? Oh, she said, that would be fantastic. So we went around to the house. The mother wasn't home, but a teenage boy was there. He came out. He took the equipment back into the house, and we heard the screams of joy, and the bouncing of the balls as we left in our vehicle. So there's a lot of
fantastic touch points that you're bringing joy to people's lives.
But people can do that. They can be part of donating to the Reclink Sports Share. If you've got sports equipment, or schools can take it up as a project, we can all have an impact around inclusion, around equipment, around the environment through sports equipment. But for our motivation is, although it impacts on environment, is to get people physically active, but people also are struggling now to put their children into sporting clubs and getting back to the informality of sport. And to finally answer your question about the technology, maybe giving the little technology a bit of a rest, getting back out on the street again, getting back into the lanes and parks, parents getting out there with the kids, brothers and sisters and all the kids in the street playing sport together. We can still play and be a part of it. And that's huge on our physical and mental health in this modern era.
I totally agree. On a personal level, you know, we have 4 children, and one thing we do is go and kick the footy after dinner, and it's getting them off devices and out of their headspace. You know, teenagehood is hard to navigate as it is, let alone those people who are disadvantaged and, you know, suffering in silence. So, and it is a really great mood shifter, and I know that personally because I witness it daily. But tell me a little bit about the books that you've written. You've written a number of books, and you've had contributions from prime ministers and some fairly high-profile people. Talk to me a little bit about this. Yeah,
actually the Prime Minister, our present Prime Minister, and also Greg Hunt when he was Federal Health Minister, who also was a wonderful supporter of Reclink. But Anthony, our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, did a number of discos for us, and has been seen and has believed in our work. So that's meant a lot to us. I can show you on the back page that testimony. You may want to read it. I think it does fit the theme of the program.
Oh, that's right. So this is from the Honourable Anthony Albanese, who's the current Prime Minister of Australia, full of stories of redemption, hope, pushing doors open for people and bringing out the very finest qualities in our communities. Put them together and they are a force for good. I see in them the very best of us. As you read the stories in this book, I'm confident you'll see the same. So that's just a little bit of an overview of what to expect.
32 stories. It can be bought at reclink.org, but all the stories are very powerful. Some people have said they've cried all the way through it, but they are stories of hope and breaking through after tough and difficult times through the vehicle of support. So health, we believe in health through community. We call this the non-clinical therapy. So, and that marries up with the social services, the work they provide. We can provide that missing element in the 75 different sports and recreations. And we're certainly looking to increase our government supports all over Australia, state and federally, to reach more and more communities, but to do more work in those communities, saving the country a lot of money, moving the country forward around mental health. And as I said, the whole country is now talking about the fallout of isolation.
Well, it's had an impact on so many different demographics of humans. So, you know, and we still haven't seen the longevity of it at this point in time. But I do want to point out to those people who are listening to the podcast, the book that we're talking about is The Power of Football by yourself?
There's 19 writers, 20 sponsors. I compiled it, but we had amazing support from the community, and because of the sponsorship, you can directly support Reclink now by going to reclink.org and purchasing the book. We nearly get the full profit on each book, and we need about 90,000 a year just to cover our Victorian football league. It's just something there that it's really what a counsellor said to me only the other day. There was a refugee man that he was counselling. To give you an idea of the background, just very simply, at 7 years of age, he's running from a war zone, not to see his mother for 20 years. He becomes a child soldier. He experiences different trauma. I can't go into the full length of his story, of course, but he's now living in Australia. He's affected by his background, but he works with the council and he's come a long way. The counsellor said, what I realised was that I could only take him so far. But he went down to the Reclink Sports Shed where we have these community Mondays. So we have a lunch, we have guest speakers, we have reflexology. He started doing the course, and he started learning boxing to do it with the NDIS program. He got involved in work therapy. He loved contributing. He became encouraged by people. People started to see his gifts. He loved the sense of friendships. And the counsellor said to me, I've seen a whole new level of improvement or him moving forward. There's some things in counselling that you can't provide, the breaking of boredom, maybe the breaking of isolation. It is so important what this very caring man has done, but he supports him to take on these sort of opportunities, which can be part of the counselling process.
Well, I think it's huge that you give people the toolkit, because a counsellor can't make you love yourself, and a counsellor can't tell you or teach you how to see what they see from an independent, impartial perspective. So, you know, understanding if you plant the seed and work with a counsellor, but then it actually comes home because they've been able to, the individual's been able to actually grasp the perspective, grasp the opportunity, grasp the hope, and really hold it close to their heart, because they feel safe in your environment. They feel like they've got a community. They don't feel like they're displaced, and they're given hope. And hopefully self-love in a lot of those cases.
It's interesting you used that word, safe. That was the word that he said this particular chap was experiencing down there. He felt safe, he felt part of it, part of the community. But one of the things, we have a lunch for about 40 people. It's put on by an elderly lady with the support of others who's about 72 years of age. You wouldn't think she's elderly, but she's incredibly energetic and so forth. But when I see people together, and we have a guest speaker yesterday was finance, I realise I could stand right back and I don't have to do anything, and all this therapy is going on, encouragement, support, people caring about one another, people having great conversations, people breaking isolation. It's all just happening naturally because you provide a facility and an opportunity and a vehicle.
And a safe space for them.
The safe space is what the council has said, that this particular chap was one of the key things, was providing that for
So
them.
you've been around for a very, very long time, well established, doing an inordinate amount of good in the community. How many participants have you had through the Reclink program, do you think, over the journey?
Over the 34 years, I mean, I couldn't really, it would be thousands, it'd be hundreds of thousands, I guess, but...
and lots of wonderful stories to be shared in this book.
Yeah.
And if you, what's next for, well, you're looking for government support, donations, people to buy the book. What else, raising awareness? What are the things that you need from this program, from our listeners and watchers today?
We'd like a really key corporate supporter. I think that they would offer a great gift to Australia or to Victoria or to the various states. We're very keen for that. We're very keen for parliamentarians to sit down with us and work out whether they would like us to come to their community and advocate for us or advocate for their community, for us to come to improve their community if they believe what we're talking about here today would be vital to their community. We would love to hear from them, and we would really love to work in their community.
Wonderful. How can people find you personally, Peter? Through the organisation?
Yeah, through reclink.org or phoning our Reclink office 9419 6672.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for coming along and sharing your story, but more so thank you so much for being such an amazing contributor to our society in such a positive way. You know, a lot of people just turn the other cheek, and there are very, very few people like you that I describe as angels here on earth. So thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thanks, Vivienne.
And I'm hoping those people who are listening or watching, if you want to play a part in making a difference to the community in which you live, please contact Reclink as soon as you can. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.